Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with Interfex 2017, presents Interfex Live.
What we usually say on the last session, this is the one between you and the cocktail hour, but believe me, this is worth sitting through for sure. We have an unusual group of folks here, and that's meant in a good way. We have the continuous manufacturing experts. We range from academia. Smile, I mean that. So we range from academia to guys who are doing it on a daily basis. So hopefully we're gonna walk through some of the background information. I'm gonna try to move through this as quickly as we can, which is tough when you got four guys trying to talk. But at the same time, I want to make sure we get time for discussion and, more importantly, for your questions. Okay? So things have been expanding, things have been changing. Let me introduce our team. We got Fernando Muzio, Professor of Chemical Engineering from my alma mater, Rutgers University. Go RU, okay? Andy Gristofides, who I have had the pleasure of being on several panels with. Eric Jajak from Patheon, and Jay Jones. So we got them all here. So let me start off. So we'll put the academic on the hot seat first. How's that? You good for that? All right. Sure. So one of the things we've been telling people, and I know, is that there has been a clearinghouse, a place to go for information. So, Fernando, why don't you tell us the academia's role in the advancement of continuous process, so that the group here understands where we're at.
Okay, all right, I'll try. So, I think that there is an interesting role for academics to play in what's development and implementation of new technology in pharma. And the reason is that a lot of the work that needs to be done to demonstrate new technology takes quite a while, and the ability to maintain your activity over multiple years is a little bit easier in a university than in a company where things have to move quarter to quarter. So we had an opportunity. We started doing this about 15 years ago, but when we had a big center funded, we had an opportunity to work with a lot of companies, Pfizer, Janssen, Bristol Myers Squibb and others, and we were able to demonstrate that continuous manufacturing will work, and at the same time we were able to talk to the agency from a neutral perspective, right? We are not in this to make money, and so it's perhaps a little bit easier for us to convince the regulators that indeed these technologies are worthwhile. So we consider ourselves to be more or less facilitators of the conversation between companies and regulators, where we can hopefully help bring everybody together.
Let me be sure we got the timing right. We're talking 15 years, right?
Yeah, actually, we started working on continuous manufacturing at least 15 years ago, and we formed a first consortium around 2003, which was funded by 4 companies: Pfizer, Merck, GEA, and Apotex in Canada. And then in 2006, when the Engineering Research Center got funded, that's 11 years ago, this became a large activity for us. So yeah, it takes 10 to 15 years.
So I think it's important that I guess everybody who's been here realizes that, it's not something that just happened to show up. We've been hammering away at it for a while. So I guess let me ask you, so having said that, we've been down the road about 15 years. What are some of the key factors that influence the design of a continuous manufacturing equipment? I mean, in the role of 15 years, what would you say are some of the key factors you're seeing?
It has changed over 15 years. I would say that when you look at the lines that were conceptualized 10 years ago, the main concern was making sure that you were going to make good product no matter what. So people put a lot of buffers into the lines. They put a lot of intermediate capacities, lots of points where you could check things. I would say in the last 3-4 years, we have switched more to controllability, to agility, to speed in development, in manufacturing. The lines have become much smaller. The original designs were much bigger. Because we have gained a better understanding of how systems work. We have a better recognition of the dynamics of these systems. We have better tools. We have models, computer models that predict how the lines work. So we can design them with more confidence, more for performance than for safety, I would say.
And how does the scale come into play here?
Well, so the scale is important because the smaller the line, the less restricted you are in terms of the minimum capacity, the minimum volume you need to produce, right? To make sense, a continuous line needs to operate for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 hours minimum. So if you make fewer kilos per hour, then you don't need a massive product to justify a continuous line. So as the lines become smaller and as we're able to efficiently operate smaller lines, there are more products that we can make in those lines.
So Eric, you buying into this? Or?
Yeah, I think it's I think in general I agree with everything Fernando said, which is I don't think surprising. I think what we've seen is that there's this idea that like the more material you have held up in a line, the more time it takes for any type of change to come through there, right? And so that's where your robustness comes. If you have a big mixer along the line, it takes a long time for a change to come through. But then on the reverse side, when you go to develop a product and you want to minimize your amount of material, what you want to do is have the minimum amount of material on the line. So this is the balance back and forth. And as far as throughput goes, we actually have this interesting problem where if you look at pretty much any plant out there and you look at their portfolio of products, 80% of their products fall into a range that would take up maybe 10% of a continuous manufacturing line, right? And so we have this interesting thing that the continuous manufacturing lines by pure numbers are too big for most of what the new products are today. There's always a blockbuster that comes out. But even that, when you have a blockbuster that comes out, there's a certain rigidity to the line. If you get to 110%, you got to build another line, right? So it's not like you can kind of number out like we do in the batch world. So it means that we're going to have to be a lot more flexible, a lot more agile, and a lot more to the product specific as we go forward. So I concur with everything Fernando said.
I see. So Jay, while we're on that topic, so
Yep.
Why did you guys get on board over there?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background.
Sure.
So you wouldn't recognize the name Delaveau, but we produce about 5 billion solid oral dose tablets a year. And up to about 3 years ago, we were strictly batch granulation, V blenders, batch blending, and we started to connect with Fernando and Doug over at Rutgers. And over the past couple years, what we've evolved to is a continuous granulation system, which starts with the raw materials through loss and weight feeders directly into a high shear wet granulation. And from there, we feed directly into a continuous blender. Same type of arrangement. And that system runs about 5-6 days a week at around 1,400 kilograms per hour. Now, we get about 2 billion tablets off of that system, and the benefits are obvious from a direct labor standpoint, but the thing that we noticed the most was the consistency of the uniformity of the blend coming out of the continuous blender. It's half the standard deviation when you look at the uniformity than what we were getting using the old batch granulation and the old, V blender batch approach. So it's been a tremendous benefit for us for a number of reasons. The only other thing I would add too is that when you do something like this, you focus on your critical process parameters. So you're constantly doing that kind of real-time testing. So, where in the past you'd have to pull samples after granulation, pull samples after blend, that would create WIP. There's no opportunity now. So you have to really monitor your process continuously, and it eliminates WIP. You get a more consistent product. It's been terrific.
So just before I circle back to Fernando, if it's okay, could you describe for us what you got in place there?
Yeah, no problem. So, we start with granulation. So you start with the raw materials, and they're fed, they're all dries, loss and weight feeders, into a horizontal granulator, which is simply, it's a high shear granulator, horizontal. That's where we add the liquids, your binders, your maltodextrins, things like that, mineral oil, whatever you're going to put in. And then from there, it goes to a fluidized bed, horizontal bed. And then at the end, all you're doing is the finishing, the particle sizing, through the Swaco. And if it's oversized, it goes back through a co-mill and, back until you get the correct particle size. And then it's vacuum fed right over to a vacuum receiver above a horizontal continuous blender. And right now, all we do is add dries, but that's where we would add like the actives, any type of excipients. Again, we use the K-Tron loss and weight feeders, and there's a lot of science that goes into your retention time, your paddle design, making sure that you get good content uniformity with that blend as it exits the continuous blender.
So let me ask you, Fernando, what type of products lend themselves to the type of process where, in other words, I want to make a continuous product. What are we looking for? What are the types of products we're looking for?
Well, depends, right? You can implement really all four major types of solid dose products. You can do direct compression, you can do wet granulation, you can do roller compaction, you can also do hot melt extrusion. That's a little harder, but you can. You can also do continuous capsule filling. So in terms of solid dose products, we can do the whole gambit. The limitations are that you need a certain volume to justify running a continuous line. So if you only make one batch a year, it's probably not appropriate, right? Now, the limitations kick in choosing which platform you choose. So if you have a very low dose product, like in batch, you probably wouldn't choose direct compression as your first choice because you might have problems with homogeneity. On the other hand, it's not really harder than in batch. It's more or less the same. If you have very large, very high drug content, then you run into the same flow problems. So you end up needing to granulate under the same situations. Now, I would add one more thing. In batch, we have tended to prefer wet granulation because of primarily concerns about segregation, right? This is not an issue in continuous, generally speaking. Continuous lines do not allow powders to segregate too much unless you have really made a big mistake designing your line, you put a big hopper in your line or something like that. But otherwise, segregation is not a problem. So we can make many more things by direct compression with much lesser risk of making bad products. So it has in fact changed what is the preferred route. I mean, companies are very quickly coming to a consensus that we should attempt direct compression first. And the reason is that in direct compression, there is a much smaller number of unit operations that need to be operating at the same rate and working in concert. So your orchestra is much smaller. So it's much easier to keep everybody on the script.
Let me ask Eric, let me ask you this question, and Fernando, you could jump in too. My question is, it's great science, and it's like, but my question is, I think Jay's got a specific case, but why is the industry in general jumping on the bandwagon? I mean, Patheon's on the bandwagon. I mean, you're a CMO, right? I mean, last time I checked.
So, and
So just help me out here.
And I think what a lot of the talk has been about is why the industry is not jumping on the bandwagon faster, right? Because we see the quality tick up, right? We know what's going on, but I think that comes down to the fact that what you see is, again, every time a company goes out and has a single product and does a business case, they're paying X number of millions of dollars for one product that's going to take up 20% of their capacity, and then what are they going to do with it, right? So as a CMO, the idea is that, if we are the process experts in this, and that we can start sharing the line time, then companies don't need to have a single investment in a line that is going to take them 5 years to build up. I mean, Patheon does a lot of products, and so we think we'll be able to fill capacity and then manage it from a holistic manufacturer's point of view, right? Just a comment back to what you said before about capacity. I think that there's two ends where the capacity is actually where the business case becomes good. The one end is like what Jay is saying. This is dedicated high volume or just high volume lines, right? It's a very clear-cut business case. The other end is development of new products, because when you go to roll those products out, you're not scaling up post-pilot scale, right? You get to the pilot scale, you get to the point that you run your DOE, and then you have your process, and you can save hundreds of thousands of kilograms of material. Depending on the financial profile of that particular product, you could end up saving hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in stuff. So then there's some question about the inefficiency on a continuous manufacturing line versus the benefits in development and the benefits to quality, right? And again, it comes down to the point that what starts to become, what I think will start to become important as we start filling these out is how fast you turn your line over, how well it's engineered to be broken down and put back together, that sort of thing.
From a facility standpoint, I mean, you and I have been down the road. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many large-scale boat anchors I've seen out there. The guy with the 120-liter V-blender. Right. It's a great monument, but it's non-functional anymore. So that ability to tune. So talk to me about footprints and size. I mean, what are we talking here?
Well, it's dramatic. I mean, the potential benefits in terms of facility size, utilities consumption, operating costs are tremendous. And I think Jay is realizing those, at this point. But it takes an organization to, willing to take that paradigm shift and commit to continuous manufacturing, because there's not a lot of, in the pharmaceutical industry right now, there's not a lot of historical data in terms of companies having implemented this. So trying to justify it by conventional, return on investment methods doesn't really work, because it's just too many unknowns. The gains are undeniable. But there is this tremendous excess of infrastructure, equipment, facility to do large-scale batch processing available. So it's a tough decision.
That was 120 cubic feet. Sorry, I said liters before. But yeah, the answer is, that was the thing that amazed me. I mean, just the scrap value alone on some of this stuff.
It's dramatic. You look at Delavo's facility, and the rooms where the conventional blending, batch blending using V blenders was taking place. They were massive. Yeah. And it's been replaced by one line, with continuous granulation, continuous blending.
Yeah, just to add, the one thing we found out, which we really didn't expect, when we went from batch, high shear batch granulation to continuous, was the consistency of the granulation going into the fluidized bed was so much better that we could take the oven temperature down from about 110 degrees C down to about 75 degrees C. So you talk about, utility savings that goes, with these types of projects. And you mentioned we actually have 450 cubic foot V blenders that are for sale. So if anybody's interested, see me after this meeting.
No, thanks.
If I may, this conversation about why would we install continuous lines when we have so many batch ones available is very similar to a conversation in the 1920s. Why do we need cars when we have so many horses? And, think about now, who would want to ride a horse, right? The advantages, the technical advantages, speed, ability to understand, ability to assure quality, speed in development are overwhelming. So I expect that this is what we're going to see in 10 years. I'm going to stake my reputation on this, right? I expect that we're going to see an increase in conversion. I think in 15 years, we're going to see 50% crossover to continuous across the board. But more important than that, I think that we're going to see that the standard regulatory expectation is going to be that you do things in such a way where you understand what you are doing. And if you want to go back and say, but I'm going to use my batch V blender because I have one, you're going to have to explain why, because they're going to be expecting something better.
Well, I think industry is going to, in my opinion, at least from large pharma, which is where that's my heritage. We had policies where we made things the same way because we scaled out. So there was, you want to be innovative, you're fired. The answer is you be innovative as long as we get these things into the pipeline. So the answer is we know that process and technology work, with all due respect, that's what they use. In fact, right down to we put a cap on the size. If you need that much, you turn on line 2. You need more, you turn on line 3. I think that, from my standpoint, this is just the next logical progression. But we're talking about the minority. So having said that, I can tell you from my end what we had to go through to get unified application of a granulation process. So Fernando, from your standpoint, what are the challenges here? We got a myriad of active ingredients. So what's the best route for these guys, for us to take to adopt that?
I think at this point, the main challenge limiting adoption of continuous systems is that to properly implement an efficient continuous manufacturing system, you need to really have fairly substantial knowledge of process engineering. And there are, in fact, very few process engineers in the pharmaceutical industry. I would say the main limiting factor right now is the lack of enough people with the right training. Because many companies hesitate to get into this if they don't have people on staff that actually understand the technology and know how to implement it. And I'm not talking about Pfizer or Merck or Eli Lilly or Janssen, right? I'm talking about companies that maybe the only engineers working at the companies are the guys who are responsible for the HVAC, right? So that's the divide. That's the gap we need to bridge. We need more people who know what they're doing.
I think the other piece too, we always have to, and this is one of the reasons that people always throw open, is that unit ops in pharmaceutics is not stoichiometric. You can't sit down and work it out.
Yeah.
I think, Fernando, what we need to tell people is the modeling that we got in place beyond compression physics it helps us to the point. Maybe you want to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for giving me a chance to talk about that. So, indeed, process engineering relies on effective modeling. You need to be able to predict how your systems are going to work, because unless you have a predictive model, you cannot really put in place process control, right? Process control requires the ability to predict how your inputs affect your outputs. So you need models to implement controls. So about 7 or 8 years ago, we started putting in place integrated models of entire lines. And these models are able to actually track a perturbation from the entry point to the exit. These models are able to tell you what happens when you connect different kinds of controllers, tuned in under different parameters. You can actually answer questions like what happens when you run under different sets of parameters so that you can select the right set of conditions. So all of that work is available. There is a very large, loose coalition of people that are contributing to the development of this platform. Right now, there are people developing models at probably 15 universities. There are multiple companies trying to commercialize this kind of software or actually commercializing it. There are modeling groups at many of the big pharma companies. I mean, Pfizer has a big modeling group. GSK has a big modeling group. Janssen has a big modeling group. So it's a change in how we approach these problems. It's a change on how we think about these problems. And one more thing, the Food and Drug Administration has a large modeling group. Okay? So this is quickly coalescing around a new vocabulary, a new set of concepts, and a new set of scientific tools to design these systems.
You would ask about the collaboration between academia and industry, right? And this is one of those places where, certainly the fundamental knowledge that goes into how you're going to just, how natural variations of material property affect your process and stuff like that. It's hard to justify that when you're trying to get a product out there, right? But I think the work that's been done at Rutgers in the last year, where they're really focusing on material properties, not a material, but material properties, and how that propagates through the system, and then trying to derive models that are somewhat agnostic to materials. And it's just like the oil industry. We want a model that gets us 80% of the way there. We got a model that gets us 80% of the way there. We can save a lot of material. We know how to start up, and then we just have to basically prove the models are going and refine it. So that home, I mean, always at a business, we're going to have that aspect. It's going to be on the backside, but we don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the graduate students, and that's what their whole lot in life is, to understand this puzzle and figure out how it's going to improve the system.
So let's get back to where the rubber meets the road for a minute here. So let me ask you this, Jay. What obstacle? I mean, yeah, we could talk, but what obstacles did you see? I mean, we're going to do this for real.
Yeah, no, well, I was listening to Eric there, and the biggest challenge we had was variability in the raw materials.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't expecting it, and when it hit, it was like, whoa, okay. So we had to go back to the suppliers and really focus on getting a raw material with less variability, because the system wasn't able to handle it. So that was probably obstacle number one as part of the learning curve. Obstacle number two for us was the blend uniformity. Really, what we found, at least with what we're doing, the best way to determine blend uniformity is to do the assay of the finished tablet, and that takes time. I mean, we tried pulling the thieves of the blends, and it ultimately ended up just having to go right to assaying the finished tablets, and that's where we got to a point where we felt good about the homogeneity of the blend.
And so material properties is one of these things that it's not that we don't have that problem in batch, it's that we have a change and we don't know what it was.
Yes.
And you have this conversation, was that the equipment, was it the way the operator set it up, right? And truly, the last thing we look at in a batch investigation is raw material properties because we have no way to look at it. We can't go back and sample the product; it's already in the batch, right? And so it's one of those things that it's a strength and a weakness. Some people see it as weakness because now they're seeing variability, but we wrap that knowledge in, we learn how to control it. We're going to have much better, higher capability processes coming out of the other end.
And Jay said something important. He went to the supplier and he asked for something. So
Yep.
that's a change because in batch, you usually don't know what to ask for.
Yeah.
So they don't know what to give you. In continuous, because it's much easier to study the relationship between your inputs and your outputs, because it's much easier to understand which material property has which effect. Then you can begin to share that understanding with your raw material suppliers so that you can really get what you need to succeed. And that's a change.
That is a change, but conversations I've had, you buy 0.5% of our output,
Yep.
and you want a composition that we don't make. We'll lot select it for you. Is that okay? Does that sound vaguely familiar?
Well,
I'm not trying to be critical, but I'm saying,
Right.
let's look at the harsh reality here.
yeah, I think that wasn't the case here. This was strictly, one of the main raw materials was more around the particle size distribution of the incoming raw, which is a key factor when you're doing a wet granulation. And it was really just bringing it to the supplier's attention that we are looking at this now and we're monitoring every 1,000 kilograms that's coming in. And I remember them saying to us, well, nobody has ever come to us and talked to us about it. And once we talked to them about it, they looked at their system and was like, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
No problem, we can do that.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. I think what's interesting is we have these certificate of analysis, right? But when you talk to people who do investigations, it's the last thing they look at. The certificate analysis is designed to get the material in the door, right? And it's not relevant to the process. So
Precisely.
the real long-term goal is, I know what to put on my certificate of analysis. This is what I need, is this property right here, and then that gives them a target.
But I think this goes back to what we've said before, the design space and the inputs have to really be. One of the biggest mistakes we see with clients is selection of the lubricant, for example. Could very be that the physical chemical properties and the morphology of the magnesium stearate we're using is just dandy until you change the way you blend it.
Yeah,
Okay? And I don't know about the rest of you. When people say they want to change where they're getting their magnesium stearate, my blood runs cold. That's serious business, and it's in everything you make. So, again, I'm not without getting into specifics. We're not talking. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but we're saying that this work is being done. So, I know the next question. So, what do you guys plan? What's your plan? Are you going to continue down the road? You got more CM in the future? What's the deal?
Yeah, where we're at this point is we take everything through continuous blending. And in hindsight, we bought this continuous blender that runs up to 1,500 kilograms per hour. So we have to go into super sacks. We can't go directly into the high-speed FETs that we have. So what we want to do next is scale down to more of a continuous blender that's in the 300 kilogram per hour range, because then we can go right from the blender and drop directly into the press. And the nice thing about that is, if you do plug flow from the press up, you're guaranteed to keep your good content uniformity that you just put all this time and effort to get out of your continuous blender, directly into your press. So we've talked about, vacuuming the finished blend over to presses, and we'd much rather vacuum the granulation and have the small blenders right above each tablet press. And that's will give us, the standard deviation on the actives will be very small when we do that. So that's the next phase.
How hard are the retrofits on this, Andy? So, yeah, I'm going to add, I'm just
Andy?
I'm gonna-
Oh, sorry.
yeah,
Go ahead.
Then we'll get to you. But the
that's-
answer is, this stuff, is this a big deal to do a retrofit?
In Jay's facility, it is. Yeah, probably.
Okay, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's a busy place, right? It's a
Right.
busy plant. Yeah, it doesn't shut down. It runs around the
Not if
clock.
you're running those
Yeah.
throughputs, no.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, nobody has time to shut down. It's disruptive. It puts your business at
Right.
risk. So anytime you do something, I mean, it's really got to be well planned.
Let me ask you this question then. If you had to start over, how would you have prevented that? What would you have done? What do you think?
As of me?
Yeah.
If I had started over, it would have been nice to have like a pilot plant unit that
Yeah.
was, we could have scaled up, to the production size. That would have been ideal. And I think, being able to use what Fernando described here from a modeling standpoint, we started this probably 2.5 years ago. And I think at this point, if I was to start again, I think using some of the work that his group has done would speed up the learning curve a little bit. But, and the last thing is, for anybody that wants to try this, the best advice is try and do it one step at a time. So if you're in batch, go to continuous granulation. Get a system that's, steady state, in control, and then go ahead and do your experiments and your testing, and then take it into a continuous blender, work through that piece of it, because you can always divert your granulation while you're doing tests on your blender and go batch blender. And then from there, take it right into the press. So,
Yeah, I think that's a key thing is that, I usually encourage companies who are not yet into this. I say, go out, buy a feeder, start learning about it, right? Then go buy a second feeder and a blender, start making blends, and then go grab an old tablet press and put it together and start off with 1 or 2 people and start developing the knowledge, because if you try to jumpstart that, you don't have the people with the knowledge, you get caught in between, right?
You think about the potential benefits in the case of a company like Delaveau, as Jay's able to close couple, the continuous blender with the press, the work in process that's being eliminated is tremendous. It's at rates of up to 1,500 kilograms per hour. It's an incredible amount of work in process and space savings, cleaning up material flows, making a more robust, compliant facility overall.
So let me throw this out there. I mean, I was very intent listening, and you did use the word scale up.
yeah.
All right. And what we're trying to say is, So, and I understand exactly what you're saying. My point to Fernando is, let me ask you this. My understanding was, if I ran, it should be the same process I develop in early stage or, intermediate stage. The only difference is going to be either the rate or the duration I run that. Is that what you see? What's happening? In other words, in Jay's case, what would you tell him? That you should have maybe not a pilot scale, but what do you foresee here?
I think that we need to realize that there is a diversity of solutions depending on what the problem is, right? We shouldn't consider every problem to be a nail. There are situations where you want to develop at scale and then go into manufacturing at the same scale. That gives you maximum speed. That makes sense if your manufacturing scale is relatively small. But if your manufacturing scale is 1,500 kilos per hour, you probably do want to develop at a smaller
Gotcha.
scale, right? It depends on the situation.
So, Eric, that's an opportunity you guys
So
understand?
yeah, I mean, what it comes down to is whether or not and like I said, there's 2 ends of the industry. There's the high volume generics, and what you see is that their business case is driven by not so much material costs, but labor and efficiency and turnover and capital investment, right? And then you have the other side, which is the branded companies, the new products, and a lot of their costs are driven by cost of API. So that's where it's not worth it to do more trials to scale up a very expensive API, because literally you've saved enough that you may be able to build a second line or something like that, right? That's where scale out comes in. But that doesn't mean that there may not be a product that comes out that is the next major blockbuster, where you want to run it at X kgs an hour launch, and then you want to do a scale up trial and run it at 4x that in a year or something like that.